All right, we begin tonight with the high-stakes diplomacy that's been going on all afternoon at the White House. Good evening, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Vargas. Just a short while ago, President Trump wrapped his meetings with Ukrainian President Zelenskyy and a powerful delegation of European leaders, all to end Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine. There are reports some of those leaders may be staying for dinner at the White House. President Trump summed up the day on Truth Social a few minutes ago. He wrote, "We had a very good meeting. Everyone is happy about the possibility of peace," and he called President Putin to fill him in. He says he's arranging another meeting with location to be determined between Putin and Zelenskyy. And after that meeting takes place, Trump says they'll have a trilateral meeting that will include himself. Now, that squad of 7 European leaders flew across the world to be Zelensky's backup in an extraordinary sit-down today after Trump's face-to-face with Putin in Alaska on Friday. Those leaders brought a unified message. They all want peace and security guarantees to ensure that Putin can't invade Ukraine again. President Trump wants peace as well, and he pushed back on the necessity of an immediate ceasefire, something Ukraine and the European leaders have insisted upon. But Trump also promises security guarantees for Ukraine, which NATO Secretary Mark Rutte characterized as, quote, a breakthrough. Trump did not provide any specifics on what those guarantees would entail, and notably, he did not rule out sending American troops to the region.
President Putin agreed that Russia would accept security guarantees for Ukraine, and this is one of the key points that we need to consider, and we're going to be considering that at the table also, like who will do what, essentially. I think that the European nations are going to take a lot of the burden. We're going to help them, and we're going to make it very secure.
Now, heading into the talks today, President Trump stressed that Zelenskyy could end the war almost immediately, in part by agreeing to Russia's extraordinary demands to give up a huge part of Ukrainian territory. But our European allies say even if Ukraine isn't officially part of NATO, it should still get the same type of Article 5 type security.
When we talk about security, we're talking about the security not just of Ukraine, we're talking about the security of Europe and the United Kingdom as well. And I really feel that we can, I think, with the right approach this afternoon, make real progress, particularly on the security guarantees, and your indication of security guarantees, of some sort of Article 5 style guarantees.
That was Keir Starmer, the leader of Britain. Let's go right now to NewsNation's Kelly Meyer, live for us at the White House. Kelly, this meeting today with Zelenskyy was a stark difference from the last time he visited the White House in February, when he left without a deal and without guarantees that America was behind him.
I can't emphasize enough, Elizabeth, how different this day was compared to that day we were here nearly 6 months ago when Zelenskyy was practically kicked out of the White House with no deal and had that confrontation with Trump. Trump saying then that Zelenskyy didn't have the cards. And today he was asked that same question and said he didn't know who held the cards here. So you even see President Trump more open to those security guarantees today. They were smiling walking down the colonnade together and out of the Oval Office. It was a completely different meeting and definitely an unprecedented one, as you saw those European leaders here with him. We're now seeing those European leaders span really Washington, D.C. for briefings post-meeting. We are hearing of some with the Finnish president, Germany's chancellor, the British prime minister. I know the NATO secretary general is here on the North Lawn, so let me know if you see him pass behind me. We're all trying to find out what we don't know here, and that's exactly what went on in that meeting in the East Room, as well as when they walked over to the Oval Office afterwards. I'm told by a senior White House official that in that Oval Office, that's where President Trump did speak to Russian President Putin. That's something that he said he would do. He would call him after this meeting. I'm told that those European leaders and Zelenskyy were not inside the Oval Office when he was speaking to Putin. They talked for about 40 minutes. You mentioned that there on the True Social post. And the White House really isn't going beyond what Trump said. They are letting him speak for himself on True Social. But the Kremlin is sharing more about the call, saying it was candid and constructive. They said it lasted for about 40 minutes. They talked about more direct negotiations between Ukraine and Russia in the future. And Putin was warmly formally thanking President Trump for both meeting with him in Alaska and continuing this conversation. So there was a lot discussed there with Putin, as well as here today with those European leaders, many of them complimenting Trump, they say, for breaking the deadlock here in this war and saying that we've done more in the last 2 weeks than we have in the last 3 years. So now we're watching for exactly when that bilateral happens, and then the trilateral meeting could happen between Zelenskyy, Trump, and Putin, because that's something Zelenskyy formally invited Trump to attend here today as well. Elizabeth.
All right. Kelly Meyer reporting live from the White House. Let us know if there's any more late-breaking news as you're standing there. There are several leaders who are still inside the White House at this hour. But in the meantime, let's get reaction from John Bolton, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and Trump's former national security advisor in his first term. Ambassador, thanks so much for being here. I first want to get your reaction to what Trump just posted, that he's going to try and set up this meeting between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelenskyy soon, and that afterward there would be another meeting that would include himself. If that all happens, that would be a big deal, wouldn't it?
It depends on how the meeting goes. I think certainly the atmospherics were different with Zelenskyy today, but that doesn't necessarily change the substance. And in fact, you could argue that a premature meeting between Zelenskyy and Putin could send the whole thing right into the garbage can. So Trump is in a rush to get a deal done, and there are certain positive aspects to that, for sure. But I don't think he is really taking cognizance of just how big the differences are between the Russian position and the Ukrainian position. We'll see how it goes. In this kind of very public setting, I think people are reluctant to make a fight and look like they're the ones obstructing peace. But it would be a big mistake to over-conclude at this point that it's just a matter of weeks before there's peace and sweetness and light in Ukraine.
Yeah, Zelenskyy has for months said, sure, let's meet. I would be happy to meet with Vladimir Putin. But Putin has notably and repeatedly refused. The statement just out a few minutes ago from Russia is notable because it says that Putin supports direct negotiations between delegations. It says nothing at all about Putin himself participating.
Right, and I think Putin believes, and he's being told by his military, that they are prevailing on the battlefield, and it is the case. They are making slow advances at a terrible human cost for Russia. But they may think that the Ukrainian front is about to break. So Putin is in no hurry to engage in negotiations that would jeopardize that. We don't know sitting here exactly what the state of the battlefield is. I think the Ukrainians look like they're holding out pretty well, but Putin has incentives different from Ukraine and the Europeans and from Trump. And although maybe everybody in that room today said they were in favor of peace, and why not, that doesn't mean that Putin is. He'll say it. But for all of them, the same question is, on what terms?
Right.
And those terms, even coming out of this meeting today, remain spectacularly vague.
Yeah, and spectacularly huge. By the way, given the massive tensions between Zelenskyy and Putin, how could the two of them even meet together without somebody else in the room to mediate?
Well, that's why I'm a little skeptical of how this is playing out. And what I've picked up in European press, and I can't verify it independently, but there was reporting that the call between Putin and Trump took place when Trump adjourned the meeting with the Europeans to go call Putin about 5 o'clock East Coast time, which would be roughly midnight Russian time. So it may be that Trump wanted to get to Putin before he went to sleep, but a 40-minute conversation, so that's Trump talking for 20 minutes plus interpretation, means he may have carried something back from Putin into the meeting, which is now one reason why several of the leaders apparently may stay at the White House. So this is still moving on, and remember, I'm sure tomorrow there's a high likelihood Putin and Trump will talk again.
All right, so the other big topic today were these security guarantees. Ukraine and the rest of Europe are all very afraid that Putin will continue his aggression and push further into Ukraine. He's shown over and over again he cannot be trusted, that he will attack when he wants to. The European leaders sitting on all sides of Trump said the same thing repeatedly. I mean, left, right, and front. We need Article 5 security guarantees. And then Trump said today, and Mark Rutte said this was a big deal, a breakthrough, he called it, that, yes, we'll agree to Article 5 security guarantees, and we may even, he wouldn't rule out sending American troops.
Right. Well, he wouldn't rule it out, but if that were a possibility, there are two kinds of troops you can send. Troops that are providing training and assistance to the Ukrainians, as we had there before the Russian invasion in 2022, or troops that are there for combat. And they would be in Ukraine prepared for combat in case the Russians violated the terms of a ceasefire or an armistice if one were put in place. So I think it's just, if that's what Trump is thinking about, and it's possible, I can't wait to see the reaction of the MAGA base that American forces at some point in the near future could be in active combat against Russian forces, the troops of one nuclear power fighting the troops of another nuclear power. I don't think that's what the MAGA base signed up for. Maybe Trump doesn't care about that, or maybe he doesn't understand some of the words he's saying. But that's what military force prepared for combat as part of a security assurance for Ukraine could look like.
All right, John Bolton, Ambassador John Bolton, thank you so much for your expert analysis. I want to bring in Mark Caputo now, senior politics reporter with Axios, who's extremely well-sourced in Trump world. Mark, great to have you here. So you were reporting today that the big goal, according to President Trump, was to get a meeting between Trump and Zelenskyy and Putin. Now we have this breaking news that he's trying to arrange a meeting between Putin and Zelenskyy. Does he really believe he can make this happen?
I think he believes he can make it happen. Of course, whether it actually happens or not is another matter. But one of the reasons I wrote the story is there's been so much talk about Donald Trump had proposed a ceasefire, and then he backed off of the ceasefire, and ceasefire. And prior to the meeting, some of Trump's advisors told me, the important thing here is the final meeting and obviously a peace deal. And in order to get that peace deal, Trump has to meet with Zelenskyy and get an idea of what he can do. And he's got to meet with Putin and get an idea of what he can do. And then he's got to get the two of them together. So steps 1 and 2 have happened. And now we're going to see if step 3 happens. Now, there's an old... Go, tell me.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, it reminds me, this 3-step process sounds very simple, but the devil's in the details. There's an old joke that there's 2 steps to becoming a millionaire, and step number 1 is to get $1 million. So there's 3 steps for peace here, and we'll see if that works.
Yeah, these two sides couldn't be further apart. I mean, dramatically, in massive ways far apart. But Trump was caught on a hot mic this afternoon telling Zelenskyy and the European leaders, I think he wants to make a deal with me. He's speaking of Putin, as crazy as that seems. That is the exact quote. How do you read that? I mean, critics will say, oh, for heaven's sake, he'll believe anything Putin tells him. And supporters will say, listen, this guy's a deal maker. He's a negotiator. If anybody can make it happen, it's him.
I'm going to say all of the above. I think Donald Trump, the through line throughout all of this, is going to say almost anything he thinks he has to say to get a deal between these two guys to get it done.
Whether it's true or not?
Whether it's true or not, whether he actually believes he's going to have a ceasefire or back off a ceasefire or have boots on the ground or not have boots on the ground or whatever. He wants to get these two guys in a room. That's not going to be enough of a win for him, but just in Trump's mind, I believe that's going to be a big win. It's going to be a lot of progress. I think one of the things that was honestly said today by the European leaders was that, yeah, this is more movement than they've seen throughout the war, albeit the United States is taking the lead and the Europeans are following and not completely objecting to a general idea of giving Vladimir Putin's aggressor country, Russia, lots of territory that unlawfully seized in an invasion.
Yeah.
So that is a change.
You're leading right into my next question, because you have more reporting on what exactly happened behind closed doors Friday evening in Alaska, because the whole meeting has been sort of shrouded in mystery. Nobody's talking. Putin apparently issued an entire series of demands, maximalist demands, and was so firm and intransigent on them that you say that Trump was ready to walk away. He really did almost walk out of the meeting?
From what we understand, Trump has told other people, and those other people have told us, that at one point in a discussion about the territory or the oblast of Donetsk, that Trump had said, look, if you're really serious about taking over this entire thing and you're not going to negotiate over this, then maybe we're just wasting each other's time. And apparently at a certain point, Putin said, no, lots of things are on the table, and indicated that he wasn't going to stick by that through thick and thin. Now, this is stuff that's told to us that Trump allegedly said in a meeting before, so who knows if it's true, but that's sort of the story that they're giving, and they're sticking to it.
Yeah, it's striking also as well, the difference in the meeting today in the Oval Office between Trump and Zelenskyy from 6 months ago. But as I'm sure you're well aware, Trump has been furious over media coverage in this country and in Europe about the Alaska summit. In Russia, however, Russian television loves it. They've been crowing. RT said today, quote, the old world order cracked in Alaska. So we shall see.
Well, Trump has himself to blame in part for the bad coverage that happened in Alaska from the traveling press. I wasn't there, because he sort of overpromised and underdelivered on the ceasefire and then didn't explain himself. And the normally very garrulous President Trump, who loves to crow and claim wins everywhere, was rather quiet and didn't take questions from the press. So that stuff is going to happen. People are going to fill in the blanks. If you say, I'm going to be disappointed if I don't get a ceasefire, and you walk out without a ceasefire, people are going to start to assume that you're disappointed.
Yeah. All right, Mark Caputo, thank you so much for sharing your inside scoop.
Thanks.
All right, coming up for us, while world leaders talk, what's the situation on the ground in Ukraine? Well, in an answer, it's pretty grim. There is no sign of surrender. We're live in Ukraine next with a report. Plus, there could be a breakthrough in the war in Gaza. Hamas is now saying it will agree to a new Gaza ceasefire proposal. All this as hundreds of thousands of Israelis protest, calling for a hostage deal now. Will Prime Minister Netanyahu come to the table? All right, at this moment, President Zelenskyy of Ukraine is addressing reporters. He's speaking in Ukrainian right now, just outside the White House. He just emerged after spending the entire afternoon meeting with President Trump and six other leaders from Europe. If he switches to English, we're going to switch back and take him. But in the meantime, we'll continue with our coverage. Because as Russian President Vladimir Putin was pursuing his Ukraine policy in what should be now, a familiar Putin style. He's been doing this now for 3 years, talking peace and making war. Overnight, at least 10 people were killed in Russian attacks on major Ukrainian cities. True to form, this latest assault was conducted with an abject disregard for civilian casualties. That has become the Russian military's calling card. In Kharkiv, an entire family, including a toddler and a teenage boy, were killed in Russian drone strikes. Ukraine's Air Force said Russia launched 140 drones and 4 missiles overnight. It was the largest assault on Ukraine since August 4th. Zelenskyy called the attacks, quote, cynical. It comes just days after Trump's Alaska meeting with Putin to discuss an end to the war. However this war ends, it should never be forgotten that Vladimir Putin has richly earned his status as an accused, indicted war criminal, a status he seems to wear as a badge of honor. Joining us now is NewsNation's Robert Sherman, who's live on the ground in Kyiv. Robert, what are, if anything, because I know it's the middle of the night there, what are Ukrainians saying about Zelenskyy coming to D.C. today, coming to the White House today, his meeting with President Trump? They must be relieved that the meeting went so much better than it did the last time he came to the White House.
Yeah, it's all about the starting point, Elizabeth, but there's a recognition here that there's more work to be done, as people believe here that any stride that's made towards peace is a very good sign here. But there's a huge distinction on the ground, Elizabeth, between getting peace in the short term and sustainability for the long term here. And everybody is talking about these words, security guarantees. I mean, it is, you saw the map that was being shown between President Trump and President Zelenskyy in the Oval Office. People are well aware of that here. The concerns that if Ukrainian troops have to pull back from the Donbass region, that could give Russia an opportunity in order to launch more strikes, just a couple years from now, another invasion here in a longer period of time. That's why these conversations with European leaders so important on the issue of security guarantees. Here was some of the conversation today.
Also all the European colleagues, it is really crucial. And the fact that you have said, I'm willing to participate in the security guarantees is a big step. It's really a breakthrough, and it makes all the difference.
You can be sure that Europeans are very lucid about the fact that they have their fair share in these security guarantees for Ukraine, but their own security is clearly at stake in this situation. So you can count on us as we can count on you.
So seeing diplomacy move forward here is well received, but people also recognize there's more to be done. There were sirens blaring here in Kyiv as those European leaders were arriving at the White House. You saw strikes across the country taking place overnight here. So there's widespread recognition that there's no such thing as a deal until it's signed, sealed, and delivered on any of this here. Elizabeth?
Right, and Putin has shown a history of then breaking the deal, so even that doesn't mean it's the end of everything. Robert Sherman reporting live in Kyiv, Ukraine. All right, moments ago, President Zelenskyy of Ukraine was speaking in English very briefly outside the White House while talking to Ukrainian journalists. Take a listen.
No, we don't have any date. We don't have any date. We just confirmed after this productive meeting with President and then with all our colleagues, with partners, we confirmed that we are ready for a trilateral meeting. And if Russia proposed to President of the United States bilateral, and then we will see the result of bilateral, and then it can be the trilateral. So I said always, so Ukraine will never stop on the way to peace, and we are ready for any kind of formats, but on the level of leaders. Thank you so much. Дякую. Ви ж з Лондону. Про вас же дуже просили.
Пане президенте, дуже дякую. Я хотів спитати.
All right, that was Ukrainian President Zelenskyy just speaking to reporters briefly outside the White House after spending the entire afternoon inside the Oval Office and inside a room meeting with both President Trump and the leaders of 7 European countries, saying no deal yet. As he's been saying for months, that he is ready to sit down for a trilateral meeting. Interesting, he focused on the trilateral meeting between himself, Putin, and President Trump. I think he recognizes what I was just asking Ambassador John Bolton, which is the likelihood of just Zelenskyy and Putin getting into a room together with no one to mediate between the two of them, and the massive differences between the two of them is going to be a tough and high hurdle to cross. In the meantime, let's go to our panel. Retired Rear Admiral Mike Hewitt, who served 31 years in the Navy. He's also co-chair of the upcoming Ukraine Reconstruction Summit. And we have retired Brigadier General Peter Zwack, who served as defense attaché to Moscow from 2012 to 2014. Thank you so much. General, I want to start with you first, because you did spend some time in Moscow. Do you think there's any chance at all that Vladimir Putin will agree to meet one-on-one with Zelenskyy? He has refused thus far for months to do so.
No, I think that Vladimir Putin looks down with disdain at Volodymyr Zelenskyy. He doesn't believe Zelenskyy is a real leader. He doesn't believe Ukraine is a real country. And Zelenskyy is not equal, if you will, to him. So I think that that's part of the problem in getting them together. He just can't stand. He just can't stand the sight of Zelenskyy.
Well, what drives that antipathy?
Oh, I mean, it goes back to, the breakaway of Ukraine, and then the various leaders, and the failure of Russian attempts to subvert Ukraine. And then the absolutely extraordinary leadership effort by Zelenskyy at a time that the Russians and Putin thought that they had it was going to be a cake.
They thought it would be a cakewalk. It turned out not to be, because Zelenskyy managed to rally so much support, and there was so much support from his own people, as well as support around the world. Admiral, I want to talk about these attacks that happened, these Russian strikes on this residential neighborhood in Ukraine, killing 10 people, including a toddler, a teenage boy. This was happening literally as these European leaders and Zelenskyy were on their way into the White House. I mean, what message is Putin trying to send here?
I think Putin is sending the message he's always sent. He's a war criminal. He could not care at all about human life. These aren't military objectives. These are attacks of terrorism. These are attacks of influence. He is trying to maintain some amount of control over the process. But in fact, I think the gathering of these European leaders and the NATO leaders with Zelenskyy in the White House has clearly shifted the position of strength to the West. And so he's playing the only card he has, which is one of terrorism. And if you look at the real military gains he's attempted to get in Ukraine, he's had very little. And so he's given it his best go, and he's made very little progress militarily in Ukraine. And that's front of mind for Vladimir Putin.
Admiral, we heard a lot of talk today about the security guarantees in the White House this afternoon. All the European allies pushing hard, saying it's not just Ukraine's security that's at stake, it's all of Europe's security that's at stake. We need these Article 5 security guarantees. And then Trump said it's possible that American forces would play a role. What would that be, realistically?
Well, first off, I think the president keeps his cards very close. Unlike President Biden,
and apparently it sounds like all options open.
All options are open, all cards are on the table, but they're held very closely. And what he doesn't do is say what he won't do, which is always the mistake of a political leader. And unfortunately, President Biden spent a lot of time telling the NATO nations what he wouldn't do in support of Ukraine. So all options are on the table. But I will tell you that the security guarantees that we're talking about against someone that we know will violate the agreement before it's even signed have to go through that lens. And it is Article 5-like, but with the advantage of not being tied to NATO. So the countries that agree to these security guarantees, and let's say that collective defense of Ukraine and its sovereignty going forward is hopefully the minimum amount that they will agree to. Anything less than that, and it's a security guarantee that Putin will walk right through when we turn our attention elsewhere.
Yeah. General, in the meantime, we have hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians who are still living in the Donbass as Russian troops hold it. They're only holding about 80% of the Donbass. Putin, in this Alaska summit, said, I want all of Donbass. That's my condition, all of it. It is, an industrial powerhouse of an area, rich in coal. What happens to the millions of Ukrainians who call that region home if somehow that land is just given to Putin in order to get him to stop attacking?
Elizabeth, I'm glad you brought up this point, because we have been the past weeks and months talking about the land and terrain. And it is, yes, it is about the people. They can grab the land or have the land cut to them in some awful deal, but it's the population.
Right.
Do the population leave or do they stay?
So we don't know?
We don't know.
Well, we don't know anything about what any peace deal might be, much less whether or not, as Admiral, you pointed out, Vladimir Putin will wait for the ink to dry before he breaks it. Retired Brigadier General Peter Zwack, retired Rear Admiral Mike Hewitt. Lots of very distinguished military with us tonight. Thank you both so much.
Thank you so much.
Coming up for us, news out of Gaza. Is it a breakthrough or a bluff? Hamas now says it will agree to a ceasefire deal. We'll have the details coming up. All right, tell me if you've heard this one before. We could be close to a ceasefire in Gaza. Hamas says it has agreed to a proposal for a ceasefire and hostage deal from Arab mediators. And if there's a reason this sounds familiar, Well, reports say the deal is almost exactly the same as the last American-backed plan. That included a two-stage 60-day ceasefire and release of half of the 20 remaining living hostages. A total of 50 hostages are still being held in Gaza. Israel would also release some Palestinian prisoners. Well, talks fell apart after Israel signed on to the deal, but Hamas refused. Israel has not responded today to this latest proposal, or perhaps this was its response. IDF tanks were seen moving into a suburb of Gaza City, and airstrikes continued across Gaza. At home in Israel, however, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing pressure. Massive crowds packed Tel Aviv's Hostage Square on Sunday and Sunday night to call on Netanyahu to reach a deal to free the hostages. The prime minister said the demonstrations will actually slow down negotiations. He reiterated that no deal can be reached until Hamas is eliminated. However, those protests were massive and clearly show the Israeli public is becoming fed up. Joining us now is Stephen Cook, Senior Fellow for Mideast and African Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. He's also the author of the book, The End of Ambition, America's Past, Present, and Future in the Middle East. Stephen, it's great to have you here. So this is almost the exact same deal Hamas rejected a couple weeks ago. Why are they agreeing now?
You're exactly right, Elizabeth. This feels like Back to the Future. It is. One Israeli official called it 98.6% the same deal that was on offer a number of months ago. Hamas is clearly feeling the pressure. The Israelis are moving closer and closer to Gaza City. And if the Israelis are good to their word, they will move all the way into Gaza City and seek to destroy Hamas. Hamas's problem is this: they cannot give up hostages, so they want these kinds of partial deals. The hostages are really their only leverage in negotiations with the Israelis. And as the Israelis turn up the pressure, and in particular as President Trump supports them, they want to be seen, and let me emphasize, they want to be seen as being more flexible without necessarily being more flexible.
Right. Well, now Netanyahu is saying all the hostages have to be released. I mean, he's gone from saying, OK, we'll take half the living and half the dead, to nope, we want them all.
Right. This is exactly part of the Israeli war strategy. If they were able to get everybody back, they would be able to fight unfettered, believe it or not, in Gaza in order to destroy Hamas. And Hamas knows that, and that's why they don't want to give up all of the hostages all at once. This is a pattern between the Israelis and Hamas almost since the beginning of these kind of diplomatic maneuvers to bring about a ceasefire and hostage deal, is that the parties aren't actually interested in a ceasefire. They're interested in blaming the other for the failure of ceasefire negotiations.
Well, and as you rightly point out, the minute Hamas relinquishes those hostages, it has nothing left, no cards left to deal. What do you make of these massive protests in Israel this week, and up to 400,000 people? The Israeli public is clearly growing weary of the war. Many are opposed to Netanyahu. And all these protesters are calling for the hostages to be released, not for the war to continue.
That's actually quite stunning to see how many Israelis are out in the streets now demanding an end to the conflict. Israelis had been firmly behind this government throughout many months, but the idea of yet a new offensive without much to show for it. Every time Israeli leaders say that they're close to getting the hostages, that more military pressure will bring hostages home, that it brings about basically nothing, a continuation of conflict. Israelis reservists have served 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tours
They're
in Gaza.
Exhausted.
The IDF is having manpower problems. So it is, although many Israelis support Prime Minister Netanyahu in opposition to a two-state solution, in opposition to the Palestinian Authority taking over in the Gaza Strip, they do want the hostages home. They believe that the government is prioritizing the fight against Hamas rather than bringing these poor people home.
Here's the irony, though, the political irony of it all. The more unpopular Netanyahu becomes, the more he needs this far-right coalition he's cobbled together to keep himself in power. And this coalition has said, no, we want to go, take over all of Gaza. They're pushing the most right-wing, conservative, provocative, and controversial aspects of Netanyahu's policy here.
Indeed. Public Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has never supported negotiations for a ceasefire and, in fact, opposed previous ceasefires. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich has been more equivocal than Itamar Ben-Gvir, but has consistently threatened to bring down the government over ceasefires. Their goal is actually the resettlement of the Gaza Strip. They are settlers, and their goal, their belief is that thoroughly destroying Hamas and resettling the Gaza Strip is both a biblical commandment as well as the best way to ensure Israeli security.
Wow, that's a real situation. Thank you. What a mess. Stephen Cook, great to have your analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All
right, coming up for us, the crackdown on crime in the Capitol continues as more National Guard troops are now on their way to Washington, D.C. Sure, it looks impressive, but is the tough approach getting results? Well, we're live in Washington next. And don't forget, you can download our NewsNation app for the latest news in the palm of your hand. All right, there's more news coming out of Washington, D.C. tonight. Aside from the high-stakes meetings on the Ukraine war happening inside the White House, there was a very different high-stakes operation unfolding outside the White House on the streets of the Capitol. National Guard forces deployed to combat crime and homelessness in the nation's capital are getting reinforcements. The state of Louisiana just became the latest to announce it is sending troops to the city. That comes after Mississippi, West Virginia, South Carolina, Ohio, and Tennessee all said they would also send their own National Guard to Washington, D.C. NewsNation Washington correspondent Joe Khalil joins us live now. Joe, you're hearing reports that troops could be armed as soon as this week.
Yeah, that is a big shift. They were not last week, and we're hearing that that is a possibility for this week. Now, we've already talked to a lot of folks who live in the district who are already sort of unsettled by what they're seeing. And so you got to imagine that that could sort of add to those anxieties. We got two things going on right now, Elizabeth, that are sort of contradictory. I want to walk you through it. And first, I just want to start by showing you what we're seeing. So you see these big armored vehicles here. This is at Union Station. We got one behind me. Straight ahead down there, we got another one. That's two. And if you'll just come this way and follow me here, this is three. These are the ones you can see here on camera. The ones you cannot see, there are two Humvees over there. It is the largest presence of National Guard that we have seen so far. And it's not just National Guard. I don't know that you can see it just 30 yards from where we're standing, a group of DEA agents, police that are there as well. So this is a big show of force here. And when we came up on this scene, Elizabeth, we thought this is very likely the increase in National Guard. We know that all of the states that you mentioned that are sending more Guard members here, that's going to literally double the presence from what was here just a week ago. But we went around D.C., we went all through the district today, and we could literally not find any other place where you see scenes like this. So this is a very popular area, thoroughfare, people, travelers coming in and out if you're riding the metro, taking the train. While there's foot traffic here, there's not a lot of crime in this particular area. There are other places, other areas in D.C. where there is much heavier crime. We haven't seen a presence like what we see now, so we're sort of asking the White House, trying to figure out what the dynamic is, but this is what we're seeing here today.
Wow, that's a very heavy presence. I know that area that you're standing in quite well. Joe Khalil, thanks so much. Coming up, back to our top story. What does Stephen A. Smith think about today's historic Trump-Zelenskyy meeting? Well, Chris Cuomo will ask him. We'll have a preview of that conversation coming up next. All right, back to our top story, and we've got Chris Cuomo back from vacation after a well-deserved week off. I hope you had a great time.
Every day is a vacation when you're at NewsNation, Elizabeth.
Okay.
No, it was good. I turned 55.
Happy birthday.
Toupee's holding up.
Oh, my gosh. Had I known, I would have had a cake for you.
My kids wanted me to color my hair for my birthday. I refused.
No. I think it looks very distinguished. Tell your kids this is the one time that they're wrong. You missed a big week of news while you were off celebrating the big 5-5. And it continues tonight with this big meeting today in the Oval Office. What did you make of it all?
So my understanding is that they shifted from stick to carrot, and I think it's a pretty palpable shift. And we'll look at it tonight. And is it a better prospect for peace? And I have some different points of view coming off our reporters in terms of what we understand about advancing it. And then I'm bringing in Stephen A. Smith to talk about which of this matters and why, because the political reaction to it is very different than the world reaction to it.
Well, the world reaction has been, I mean, you know, why do you think all those European leaders, you know, they were panicking, according to reports over there, after the Alaska summit, and its stunning conclusion where President Trump spoke for just a little over 3 minutes and then got on a plane and headed home. They've held their cards very close to the vest, not really revealing a lot, but I don't know. It's going to be a fascinating few days to see how this plays out.
I agree with you. My pro tip is what we saw today is proof that when America asks, you come.
Yep.
And I think it's a really important reminder for people at home who are, you know, we're all addicted to beating up on ourselves. And we just saw something today that is a reminder for all Americans. Elizabeth, thank you very much. I'll take the baton here. Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.